The iron chains felt colder than the blizzard howling through Kearney, Nebraska. And Delilah Winters knew she was about to be sold to the highest bidder like a mare at market. Snow fell in thick curtains that December afternoon in 1876, transforming the ramshackle auction platform into something almost beautiful, though nothing could disguise the ugliness of what was happening. Delilah stood shivering in a threadbare cotton dress, her dark auburn hair plastered against her pale cheeks, her green eyes scanning the crowd of men gathered below. They looked at her with varying degrees of interest, calculating her worth like she was livestock. Her wrists bore faint bruises from the rope that had bound them just hours before, evidence of her failed attempt to escape the ruthless creditors who had seized her after her father's death, left debts she could never repay. The auctioneer, a portly man named Graves with tobacco-stained teeth, rubbed his hands together against the cold and began his practice spiel. "Gentlemen, we have here Miss Delilah Winters, 22 years of age, healthy, educated by her late father who was a schoolteacher before his unfortunate demise. She can read, write cipher numbers, and by all accounts she is a hard worker. We will start the bidding at $50. Delilah wanted to spit in his face, wanted to scream that she was not property, but the two armed men flanking the platform made resistance pointless. She had already tried running, already tried fighting, and all it had earned her was a night locked in a cellar and the promise that if she caused trouble, they would sell her to the worst bidder regardless of price. A man in the front called out, $60. Another voice from the back responded, $75. Delilah forced herself to breathe steadily, to not show the terror clawing at her insides. The snow continued falling harder, the wind whipping her skirt around her legs. She could barely feel her feet anymore. Then a voice cut through the chaos, deep and firm. $300. The crowd went silent. Even Graves looked startled. Delilah's gaze snapped to the speaker, a tall man standing apart from the others. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat dusted with snow, a black Stetson pulled low over his brow, and his eyes were the color of smoke in firelight. His jaw was strong and stubbled, his stance that of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. Everything about him spoke of competence and quiet authority. "Did you say 300, mister?" Graves asked, his greed evident in his widening grin. "That is what I said," the cowboy replied. His voice carried easily despite the wind. "But I have conditions." "Conditions?" Graves frowned. "This is an auction, not a negotiation." The cowboy stepped forward, and Delilah noticed how the crowd parted for him. "You will provide Miss Winters with a proper coat before she leaves this platform. You will also provide her with boots, as those shoes are not fit for this weather. And you will destroy any and all papers claiming ownership of her person, because where I come from, we do not own people." Graves sputtered. "Now see here, this is highly irregular. $300 is more than twice what you expected," the cowboy interrupted, his tone turning cold. "I suggest you take it and meet my conditions, or I will walk away and you will be lucky to get half that amount from any other man here." The auctioneer's eyes darted between the cowboy and Delilah, calculating. Finally, he nodded sharply. "Fine. $300 and I will provide the coat and boots, but I cannot destroy the papers. That is not how this works." "Then I will take the papers," the cowboy said, "and I will destroy them myself. Do we have an agreement?" Graves hesitated, then nodded again. "We do." Money changed hands swiftly, gold coins glinting briefly before disappearing into Graves's coat. Someone brought forth a worn but serviceable wool coat and a pair of leather boots that looked like they might actually fit. The cowboy climbed the platform steps himself and took the items, then turned to Delilah. Up close, She could see his face more clearly. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with weathered skin that spoke of years under the sun and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His eyes met hers, and she saw something unexpected there: respect. "May I?" he asked, holding up the coat. Delilah nodded, not trusting her voice. He draped the heavy wool around her shoulders, and the warmth was immediate and almost painful after the biting cold. Then he knelt in the snow and held out the boots. "These should fit better than what you are wearing," he said quietly. She slipped off her ruined shoes, her feet numb and likely frostbitten, and pushed them into the boots. They were lined with fur and felt like heaven. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes," she managed, her voice hoarse. He stood and offered his arm. "My name is Carter Owens. I have a horse waiting. We should get out of this storm." "Why?" The word burst from her before she could stop it. "Why did you do this?" Carter glanced back at the crowd, at Graves counting his coins, at the armed men who had guarded her. "Because it was wrong," he said simply. "And because I could." He guided her down the steps carefully, keeping his body between her and the crowd. A magnificent bay gelding waited nearby, already saddled, with saddlebags that looked packed for a journey. Carter helped her mount first, then swung up behind her with the ease of someone who had been riding since childhood. He wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her, took the reins with his other hand, and urged the horse into motion. They rode through Kearny's Main Street as the blizzard intensified, passing the general store, the saloon, the marshal's office. Delilah waited for someone to stop them, to cry out that she was stolen property, but no one did. The few people still outside were too busy hurrying for shelter to pay attention to two riders in the snow. Once they left town behind, Carter guided the horse toward a small homestead visible in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney, a beacon of warmth in the white wilderness. The ride took perhaps 20 minutes, though it felt longer with the wind cutting through even the thick coat. Delilah's entire body trembled, whether from cold or shock or relief, she could not say. The homestead consisted of a sturdy log cabin, a barn, a chicken coop, and a corral that currently held two other horses seeking shelter against the barn wall. Carter rode straight to the cabin, dismounted, and reached up to help Delilah down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her easily. "Easy now," he said. "Let us get you inside and warm." The cabin's interior was simple but well maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a healthy fire burning that filled the single large room with heat. There was a cast iron stove, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, shelves lined with books and supplies, and a bed in the far corner made up with thick quilts. Everything was clean and organized, the home of someone who took care with his surroundings. Carter guided Delilah to the rocking chair closest to the fire. "Sit here. I need to tend to my horse, but I will be back shortly. Do not take off those boots yet. Your feet need to warm gradually, or the pain will be severe." She nodded mutely and sank into the chair. The warmth from the fire was almost overwhelming after the bitter cold outside. She watched as Carter grabbed a lantern and disappeared back into the storm, leaving her alone in his home. Delilah's mind raced. She was in a stranger's cabin, a stranger who had just paid an enormous sum for her at an auction. What did he expect from her? What were his true intentions? He had spoken of not owning people, had treated her with unexpected kindness, but men could be deceptive. She had learned that harsh lesson when her father's so-called friends had turned on her the moment he died, seizing everything to cover his debts and deciding to auction her off rather than simply taking the property. But something about Carter Owens felt different. The way he had looked at her, the way he had insisted on the coat and boots, the way he had asked permission before helping her. None of it fit the pattern of a man who viewed her as property. The door opened, bringing a gust of snowy wind, and Carter stepped back inside. He removed his hat and coat, hung them on pegs by the door, and stomped the snow from his boots. Underneath the coat, he wore denim trousers, a flannel shirt, and a leather vest. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. He crossed to the stove and lifted a kettle that had been warming. "Coffee," he offered. "Yes, please," Delilah said. He poured 2 tin cups and brought one to her, then pulled one of the kitchen chairs over and sat down facing her. Not too close, she noticed, keeping a respectful distance. "I imagine you have questions," Carter said, wrapping his hands around his own cup. "I have many questions," Delilah replied, her voice gaining strength. "Starting with what you expect from me." He took a sip of coffee, considering his words. "I expect nothing. What happened in town was not a transaction, Miss Winters. It was a rescue that unfortunately required money to execute. You are not indebted to me. You are not obligated to me. You are free." "Free," she repeated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "You paid $300 for my freedom." "I did." "Why?" Carter's gray eyes held her steadily. 6 years ago, I came west from Virginia after the war. I fought for the Confederacy, Miss Winters, though I owned no slaves and disagreed with the institution. I fought because my state seceded, and I felt I had no choice. I saw terrible things during those years, including the auction of human beings. When the war ended and slavery was abolished, I swore I would never again stand by while another person was treated as property." He paused, his jaw tightening. "When I rode into Kearney this morning to buy supplies, I heard about the auction. I almost left town rather than witness it, but something made me stay. When I saw you standing on that platform in the snow, I knew I could not walk away. So I did not." Delilah studied his face, looking for deception and finding none. "You could have simply taken me. You are armed and you clearly know how to handle yourself." "I could have," Carter agreed, "but that would have made me a criminal and put us both in danger. This way there is no legal pursuit. I have the papers that Graves prepared. Once I destroy them, there will be no record that matters." He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded document, stood, and tossed it directly into the fireplace. They both watched as the flames consumed the paper, reducing her supposed bill of sale to ash. "There," Carter said, sitting back down. "Now you are simply a woman who happens to be in my cabin during a blizzard. When the storm passes, you are free to go wherever you wish. If you have family elsewhere, I will give you money for travel and escort you to the railroad. If you have nowhere to go, you are welcome to stay in Kearney or move on to another town. The choice is entirely yours." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "I have no family. My mother died when I was 12. My father died 6 weeks ago. There is no one." "I am sorry for your losses," Carter said gently. "The debts were real," Delilah continued, needing him to understand. "My father was a good man, but he was terrible with money. He borrowed to keep the school running, borrowed to pay for my mother's medical care before she died, borrowed to buy books and supplies. When he had a heart attack and died suddenly, the creditors came immediately. They took our house, our belongings, everything. And then they decided that I should be sold to cover the remaining debt." "That was wrong," Carter said firmly. "A daughter is not responsible for her father's debts, and even if she were, no debt justifies selling a human being. The law did not agree with you. The law is not always just." He finished his coffee and set the cup aside. "Miss Winters, it is late afternoon and the storm shows no sign of stopping. You should rest and eat. We can discuss your plans tomorrow when the weather clears. Where will you sleep?" Delilah asked, suddenly aware that there was only one bed in the cabin. "I have a bedroll. I will sleep by the fire. The bed is yours." She wanted to argue, to insist that this was his home and she was the interloper, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves. The terror of the auction, the cold, the shock of everything that had happened, it all caught up with her at once. "Thank you," she whispered. Carter stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down a tin of crackers and some dried beef. "This is not much of a supper, but I was not expecting company. Tomorrow I will cook something proper." He brought the food to her, along with more coffee, and then busied himself on the other side of the cabin, giving her privacy to eat. Delilah nibbled the crackers and beef, her stomach grateful despite the simplicity of the meal. The warmth of the cabin, the food, the safety, it was all almost too much to comprehend. When she finished eating, Carter showed her where the wash basin was, provided her with a clean cloth, and then retrieved a folded nightgown from a chest. "This was my mother's," he explained. "She passed 2 years ago, but I kept some of her things. You are welcome to wear it." The nightgown was soft cotton, faded but clean. Delilah took it with trembling hands. "I will step outside for a few minutes," Carter said. "Give you privacy to change." "It is a blizzard," Delilah protested. "I will stand in the barn doorway. I need to check on the horses again anyway." He pulled on his coat and hat and slipped out before she could argue further. Delilah changed quickly, peeling off the damp dress and undergarments and pulling on the nightgown. It was slightly too large, but it was warm and dry. She hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry and then climbed into the bed. The quilts were heavy and soft, and the mattress was stuffed with what felt like fresh straw and feathers. Luxury after the cold, hard floor of the cellar where she had spent the previous night. Carter returned a few minutes later, his coat covered in fresh snow. He hung it up, removed his boots, and set about laying out his bedroll near the fire. He moved quietly, efficiently, clearly trying not to disturb her. "Mr. Owens," Delilah called softly. He turned. "You can call me Carter, Carter," she amended. "I know I already thanked you, but I need you to understand. You saved my life today. I will never forget that." His expression softened. "You are welcome, Miss Winters. Sleep well." "Delilah," she said. "If I am to call you Carter, you should call me Delilah," he nodded. "Sleep well, Delilah." She closed her eyes, expecting to lie awake for hours replaying the day's events, but exhaustion claimed her swiftly. Her last conscious thought was that for the first time in 6 weeks, she felt safe. Delilah woke to the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in her childhood home, that her father was making breakfast and everything that had happened was just a nightmare. Then reality reasserted itself, and she opened her eyes to see the log cabin, the fire burning cheerfully, and Carter standing at the stove. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin's 2 windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything outside was white and pristine, beautiful in the way that only fresh snowfall could be. Carter glanced over and saw her awake. "Good morning. I hope the smell did not wake you too early." "What time is it?" Delilah asked, sitting up. "Nearly 8 o'clock. You slept soundly." She had slept for over 12 hours. Delilah could not remember the last time she had rested so well. She pushed back the quilts and stood, suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed nightgown. "Your dress is dry," Carter said, gesturing to where it hung by the fire. "And I have water warming if you would like to wash." "Thank you." He turned his back and focused on the cooking, giving her privacy to dress. Delilah changed quickly, grateful to be in her own clothes despite their worn state. The dress had been her second best before her father died. A practical brown wool that was now her only possession aside from the coat and boots Carter had provided. She washed her face and hands in the warm water, braided her long hair to keep it tidy, and then joined Carter at the table. He had set out 2 plates with bacon, fried eggs, and thick slices of toasted bread. "This looks wonderful," Delilah said sincerely. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The food was simple but well prepared, and Delilah realized she was ravenously hungry. She had eaten so little in the past weeks, and now her body was demanding fuel. "I need to ride into town today," Carter said as they finished eating. "I never did get those supplies yesterday. You are welcome to come with me if you wish, or you can stay here." "I will not be gone more than a few hours." Delilah hesitated. The thought of returning to Kearney so soon made her stomach clench with anxiety. What if someone recognized her? What if Graves caused trouble? Carter seemed to read her thoughts. "No one will bother you if you are with me," he said quietly. "But I understand if you prefer to remain here. The cabin is warm and there is food. You would be perfectly safe." "I think I would prefer to stay here if that is acceptable," Delilah said. "Of course." Carter stood and began clearing the dishes. "I should leave soon to make the most of the daylight. Is there anything you need from town?" Delilah thought of her bare list of possessions. "I have no money." "I did not ask if you had money. I asked if you needed anything." She bit her lip. Pride warred with practicality. "I need everything, but I cannot accept more charity from you." Carter rinsed the dishes in a bucket of water and turned to face her. "Delilah, it is not charity. You cannot leave here with only the dress on your back. At minimum, you need another set of clothing, undergarments, a brush for your hair, personal items. Let me purchase those things. Consider it part of your rescue if that makes it easier to accept. You have already spent so much, and I do not regret a penny of it." He dried his hands on a cloth. "Please, let me help." Delilah thought about refusing, about clinging to her pride, but what good was pride when she literally had nothing? "All right," she said softly. "Thank you." Carter smiled for the first time since she had met him, and it transformed his face. The stern cowboy became someone younger, warmer, more approachable. "Good. I will do my best with the purchases. I had a sister once, so I am not completely ignorant about what women need, though I make no promises about fashion." "You had a sister?" The smile faded. "She died of scarlet fever when she was 9. I was 12. It was a long time ago, but I still miss her. I am sorry." "Life in the West is hard," Carter said simply. "We all carry losses. I will leave you the rifle just in case, though I do not expect any trouble. Do you know how to shoot?" "My father taught me," Delilah said. "I am a fair shot." "Good." Carter pulled on his coat and hat, checked that his sidearm was loaded, and then showed Delilah where the rifle was stored. "I will be back by early afternoon at the latest. Make yourself at home." After he left, the cabin felt very quiet. Delilah stood at the window and watched Carter ride away on his bay gelding, his figure growing smaller against the white landscape, until he disappeared entirely. Then she turned and surveyed the space that was temporarily her sanctuary. She spent the morning cleaning, needing something to occupy her hands and mind. She washed the dishes properly, swept the floor, organized the shelves, and even tackled some mending she found in a basket. Carter's clothes were well cared for but showed the wear of hard use, and she found several shirts that needed buttons replaced or seams reinforced. It felt good to be useful, to contribute something however small to the man who had saved her. Delilah had always been industrious, had helped her father with the school and managed their household after her mother died. The forced idleness of the past weeks, locked up or guarded constantly, had been its own form of torture. As she worked, she thought about her situation. Carter had said she was free to go, had offered to help her travel anywhere she wished. But where would she go? She had no family, no friends who had not abandoned her when trouble came. She had been trained to teach, but what school would hire a woman whose last employment had ended in scandal, even if the scandal was not her fault? And there was something else, something she was almost afraid to acknowledge. She did not want to leave. Not yet. Not until she understood this man who had saved her. This Carter Owens who lived alone in a Nebraska homestead and threw $300 away on a stranger's freedom. Carter returned in early afternoon as promised, his saddlebags full of supplies. He looked cold but satisfied as he stomped snow from his boots and began unpacking. "I hope I guessed correctly on sizes," he said, pulling out wrapped parcels and setting them on the table. "The shopkeeper's wife helped me, so these should be appropriate." Delilah opened the packages with growing amazement. There were 2 new dresses, one dark blue and one deep green, both practical wool but of good quality. There were undergarments, stockings, a warm shawl, a hairbrush and hand mirror soap, a toothbrush and tooth powder, even a small sewing kit. "This is too much," she protested, even as her fingers traced the soft fabric of the blue dress. "It is exactly enough," Carter countered. He pulled another item from his bags, a book bound in dark leather. "I also got this. The shopkeeper said it was popular. I thought you might enjoy something to read." Delilah took the book and read the spine. "Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. I have wanted to read this for years." "Then I chose well." Carter looked pleased. "I also need to tell you there was talk in town about the auction." Delilah's stomach dropped. "What kind of talk?" "Graves is claiming I stole you, that the transaction was not legal. He convinced the marshal to come out here tomorrow to investigate." "What will happen?" Delilah asked, fear rising in her throat. Carter's expression turned hard. "Nothing will happen. The transaction was entirely legal. I have witnesses, and I paid more than the asking price. Graves is angry because I made him look bad in front of the town, but he has no grounds for complaint. Marshal Hendricks is a reasonable man. I have known him for 3 years. He will see that everything is in order. And if he does not, then I will handle it," Carter said firmly. "You are under my protection now, Delilah. No one is going to take you anywhere you do not wish to go." The next morning, Marshal Hendricks arrived on horseback just after breakfast. He was a grizzled man in his 50s with a weathered face and sharp blue eyes. Carter invited him inside, and the marshal removed his hat as he entered, nodding politely to Delilah. "Miss Winters," he said, "I need to ask you some questions if that is all right." "Of course," Delilah replied, her heart pounding. "Did Mr. Owens here purchase you at auction 2 days ago?" "He did." "And has he mistreated you in any way?" "No, he has been nothing but kind and respectful." Marshal Hendricks studied her face carefully. "You do not have to protect him if he has hurt you or threatened you, miss. That is what the law is for." "I am not protecting him," Delilah said steadily. "I am telling you the truth. Carter saved me from a terrible situation. He has offered me shelter and help with no expectation of anything in return. He has treated me as an equal and a guest in his home." The marshal turned to Carter. "Graves says you threatened him." "I made my conditions clear," Carter replied calmly. "I insisted Miss Winters be provided with adequate clothing for the weather and that I be given the sale papers. Graves agreed to my terms and accepted my money. There was no theft and no coercion. Graves is making noise about the amount you paid, says it proves something unnatural is going on." "The amount I paid proves I wanted to ensure no one else placed a higher bid," Carter said. "There is nothing unnatural about having a conscience, Marshal." Hendricks was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between them. Finally, he sighed. "I told Graves he was wasting my time. The auction was legal, even if the whole business leaves a bad taste. You paid your money fair and square, Owens. What you do with your property after purchase is your business." "She is not my property," Carter said sharply. "She is a free woman who is currently my guest." The marshal raised his eyebrows. "That is a peculiar arrangement." "Nevertheless, it is the arrangement," Carter said. "Is there anything else, Marshal? Just one thing." Hendricks looked at Delilah again. "Miss, are you staying here of your own free will?" "I am," Delilah confirmed. "Then I suppose that settles it." The marshal put his hat back on. "Graves won't be happy, but there is nothing more to be done. You folks have a good day." After the marshal left, Delilah sank into a chair, her legs weak with relief. "I thought he might try to take me back." "I would not have let that happen," Carter said. "But I am glad it did not come to that. The law was on our side this time." "This time," Delilah repeated. "But what about next time? What happens when people start questioning why I am living here with you?" Carter pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "That is a fair question. I have been thinking about it. You have several options. As I said before, I can help you relocate to another town where no one knows your history. You could start fresh, find work as a teacher or a seamstress or in a shop. Or," Delilah prompted, hearing the unspoken alternative, "or you could stay here. I could use help with the homestead. I have been managing alone, but it is difficult, especially in winter. I could pay you a fair wage for your work, and you would have a place to live and food to eat." "People would talk," Delilah said. "They would," Carter agreed. "We could mitigate that somewhat. There is a family about 5 miles from here, the Hendersons. They have 4 children and have mentioned they would like the older ones to have more formal schooling. You could live with them and teach their children. Come here during the day to help with the homestead. That would give you independence and respectability." It was a thoughtful solution, but something about it made Delilah's chest tighten with disappointment. She told herself she was being foolish. She barely knew this man. Why should it matter if she lived separately from him? Or, Carter continued, his voice careful, there is a third option, one that would silence the gossip entirely and give you complete security. "What option is that? We could marry." Delilah's breath caught. She stared at Carter, certain she had misheard. "You cannot be serious." "I am entirely serious." Carter leaned forward, his gray eyes intent. "Listen, I know this sounds insane, we barely know each other, but think about it practically. If you were my wife, no one could question your presence here. You would have legal protection, financial security, and a home. We could build a real homestead together, maybe expand the farm, raise cattle or horses." "But marriage is not a business arrangement," Delilah protested. "It is supposed to be about love and partnership." "It can be about partnership," Carter said. "People marry for many reasons. Settlers out here often marry for practical reasons, to combine resources and skills. Love can come later if we are fortunate, or we can simply be partners and companions. I will not press you for anything you do not wish to give." Delilah stood and walked to the window, her mind reeling. Marriage. To a man she had known for 2 days. It was absurd, impossible, and yet. "Why would you do this?" she asked, not turning around. "You have already done so much." "Why would you tie yourself to me permanently?" "Because I like you," Carter said simply. "In the short time we have spent together, I have seen that you are strong, intelligent, and resourceful. You cleaned my entire cabin today without being asked. You are mending my clothes. You have endured terrible circumstances with grace and courage. I think we could make a good team." "That is not love," Delilah whispered. "No," Carter agreed, "but it is a foundation. My parents married for love and they were happy until the day they died. My sister's friend married for love, and her husband beat her until she fled in the night with their children. Love is no guarantee of happiness, Delilah. Respect and partnership, those are what matter." He crossed the room to stand beside her at the window, though he did not touch her. I am not asking for an answer today. Think about it. Consider all your options. I will support whatever decision you make." "If I say no, will you still help me leave?" Delilah asked. "Of course." "And if I say yes, you promise to treat me as an equal, not as property you purchased?" "I promise," Carter said solemnly. "If you marry me, it will be as partners in every sense of the word." Delilah turned to look at him, studying his face. She saw honesty there and kindness and something else, a loneliness that matched her own. Carter Owens lived alone on this homestead, had lost his parents and his sister, had fought in a war he did not believe in. He was as adrift in the world as she was. "I need time to think," she said. "Take all the time you need." But even as she said it, Delilah realized she had already made her decision. What did she have to lose? If she left, she would be alone and vulnerable in a world that had already proven how cruel it could be. If she stayed as an employee or lived with another family, she would always be the charity case, the woman who was auctioned. But if she married Carter, she would have a true fresh start. She would have a home, a partner, a purpose. And maybe, if she was very fortunate, she would eventually have love. 3 days later, Delilah stood in the small church in Kearney, wearing the green dress Carter had bought for her, with the town minister preparing to perform a wedding ceremony. Carter stood beside her in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his expression solemn. The only witnesses were Marshall Hendricks and his wife, a plump, kind woman named Ruth who had taken one look at Delilah and immediately began fussing over her, pinning up her hair and lending her a string of pearls for the ceremony. "Something borrowed," Ruth had said with a warm smile. "Every bride needs something borrowed." The ceremony was brief and simple. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices steady. Carter slipped a gold ring onto Delilah's finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Carter leaned in and kissed her gently on the lips, a chaste kiss that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her body. "Congratulations, Mrs. Owens," he murmured, and Delilah felt a smile tug at her lips despite the strangeness of it all. There was no wedding breakfast or celebration. They signed the marriage certificate, accepted the Hendricks' good wishes, and rode back to the homestead that was now legally Delilah's home as much as Carter's. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment. They were painfully polite with each other, like two strangers sharing a house, which in many ways they were. True to his word, Carter did not press Delilah for intimacy. He moved a second bed into the cabin and placed it on the opposite side of the room from his own, giving them each privacy. They fell into a routine. Carter tended the horses and the small herd of cattle he kept, repaired fences, chopped wood, and handled the heavy outdoor work. Delilah managed the household, cooked their meals, maintained their clothes, and began planning a garden for spring. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, learning about each other in careful increments. Delilah discovered that Carter had a dry sense of humor and a passion for reading, that he played the harmonica tolerably well, and that he had dreams of expanding the homestead into a real ranch someday. Carter learned that Delilah loved mathematics and could calculate figures in her head faster than he could with paper, that she had a beautiful singing voice, and that she wanted to open a school of her own one day. They were careful with each other, respectful and kind, but there was a distance between them that neither seemed to know how to bridge. That changed on a cold evening in January, nearly a month after their wedding. Carter had been out all day checking his cattle and came home looking exhausted and discouraged. He removed his coat and boots mechanically, barely speaking as he washed up for supper. "What is wrong?" Delilah asked as they sat down to eat. "I lost 2 calves to wolves," Carter said heavily. "Found what was left of them near the creek. That is a significant loss. I was counting on selling those calves in spring. Delilah thought quickly. How much would they have brought? Maybe $40 for both if they grew well. We can make that up, Delilah said. I have been thinking. I could take in sewing and mending. There must be people in town who would pay for such services. And you mentioned the Hendersons wanted a teacher. I could teach their children 3 days a week for a small fee. Carter looked up at her, surprise in his eyes. You would do that, of course. This is our homestead now, Carter. Your troubles are my troubles. We are partners, remember? Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that had not been there before. Yes, he said quietly. We are partners. Thank you, Delilah. You do not need to thank me. This is what marriage is supposed to be. After supper, as Delilah washed the dishes, Carter came up beside her. Let me help, he said, taking a dish towel. They worked side by side in companionable silence, and Delilah found herself acutely aware of his presence. The warmth of his body so close to hers, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed against hers, the strength in his hands as he dried the plates. When they finished, Carter did not immediately move away. Delilah, he said softly, I want you to know that I do not regret marrying you. Not for a single moment. She turned to look up at him. I do not regret it either. I know this is not what you must have imagined for your life. I know I am not the husband you would have chosen if circumstances were different, but I hope, in time, that we can be truly happy together. Not just managing, but genuinely happy. I think we can, Delilah said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Carter smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. Good. That is good. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and gentle. Delilah's breath caught, but she did not move away. May I kiss you? Carter asked. A real kiss, not like at the wedding. Delilah nodded, unable to speak. Carter cupped her face in both hands and lowered his lips to hers. This kiss was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. It was deep and slow and searching, a question and an answer all at once. Delilah felt heat pool in her belly, felt her hands rise to grip Carter's shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Carter rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. Why did you not? I did not want to rush you. I wanted you to be sure. I am sure, Delilah whispered. I am very sure. That night, Carter helped Delilah move her belongings to his bed, which became their bed. They made love slowly and carefully, learning each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered words. It was sweet and tender, and nothing like the terrifying ordeal Delilah had feared based on whispered warnings from married women in her past. Carter was patient and attentive, making sure she was comfortable and willing every step of the way. Afterward, lying wrapped in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Delilah felt something settle inside her. This was right. This unexpected marriage to a man she barely knew had somehow become exactly where she was supposed to be. Carter. She said into the darkness. Yes, I think I am falling in love with you. His arms tightened around her. I know I am falling in love with you. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and the homestead came alive with activity. Delilah planted a large garden with vegetables and herbs, worked with Carter to build a chicken coop that would not fall apart in the first strong wind, and began teaching the Henderson children 3 mornings a week. The children were eager learners, and their parents paid Delilah in both cash and goods, providing eggs, milk, and butter that supplemented their supplies. True to her word, Delilah also took in sewing and mending, and word spread quickly that Mrs. Owens was skilled with a needle. Women from town began bringing her their projects, and the extra income helped Carter purchase 6 new calves to replace those he had lost to wolves. The homestead prospered under their joint efforts. Carter expanded the corral and bought 2 more horses with the intention of eventually breeding them. They worked together to repair the barn's roof before the spring rains came. They planted an orchard of apple and pear saplings that would not bear fruit for years, but represented their faith in a shared future. And through it all, their relationship deepened and grew. The careful politeness of early marriage gave way to genuine intimacy and affection. They learned each other's moods and habits, learned how to work together and when to give each other space. They had their first real argument when Carter made a major purchase without consulting Delilah, and they both learned from it. Their second argument came when Delilah accepted too many sewing projects and exhausted herself trying to complete them all, and Carter had to literally take the work out of her hands and insist she rest. They learned to talk through their disagreements, to compromise, to truly function as equal partners. And with each passing week, the love between them grew stronger. In late April, Delilah missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought nothing of it, assuming the change was due to stress or extra work. But when she missed a second month and began feeling queasy in the mornings, she knew. She was pregnant. She chose a quiet evening after supper to tell Carter. He was sitting by the fire, working on a leather bridle that needed repair, when Delilah settled beside him. "I have news," she said, her hands folded nervously in her lap. Carter set aside the bridle and gave her his full attention. "What kind of news?" "The kind that will change our lives." She took a deep breath. "I am going to have a baby." For a moment, Carter simply stared at her, then a smile spread across his face, slow and wondering. "A baby, are you certain?" "I am certain." "How do you feel? Are you well? Do you need anything?" The questions tumbled out rapid fire, concern and excitement warring in his expression. Delilah laughed, the sound bright and happy. "I feel fine. A little sick in the mornings, but Ruth Hendricks says that is normal. Carter, are you pleased?" "Pleased." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Delilah, I am more than pleased. I am overjoyed. A child, our child." That night, lying in bed with Carter's hand resting protectively on her still, flat belly, Delilah thought back to that snowy day in December when she had stood on an auction platform, certain her life was over. She thought about the cowboy who had paid double what anyone expected and called her his equal. She thought about how far they had come in just a few short months. "Carter," she said into the darkness. Thank you for saving me." "Thank you for letting me," he replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on us." "I love you," Delilah said. "I love you too," Carter answered. "More than I ever thought possible." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Delilah continued her teaching and sewing as long as she was able, though Carter fussed over her constantly, worried she was working too hard. She felt healthy and strong, and her body bloomed with new life. In September, as the leaves began to turn gold and red, Delilah went into labor. Ruth Hendricks came to help, along with the town doctor, a competent man named Foster who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Carter, pacing outside the cabin, feared he would lose both wife and child. But Delilah was strong, and just after dawn on a cool September morning, she delivered a healthy baby boy. Carter was allowed in just as the baby let out his first lusty cry, and when Dr. Foster placed the tiny bundle in his arms, Carter felt tears stream down his face. "We have a son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He carried the baby to Delilah, who lay exhausted but smiling in their bed. "Look what we made." Delilah cradled the baby against her chest, marveling at his tiny, perfect features. He had a dusting of dark hair and eyes that might someday be gray like his father's. "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at their son, Carter said, "What about Samuel? It means asked of God." "I feel like both of you are gifts I asked for without knowing I needed." "Samuel," Delilah repeated. "Samuel Owens. I like it." Little Samuel proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who quickly became the center of their world. Carter was a devoted father, surprising himself with how naturally the role came to him. He would walk Samuel around the cabin in the middle of the night when the baby was fussy, singing soft songs in his rumbling voice. He built a beautiful cradle that rocked gently, carving flowers and horses into the wood. He was gentle and patient and utterly besotted with his son. Delilah recovered from the birth slowly but steadily. She nursed Samuel and cared for him with fierce love, sometimes still amazed that this was her life now. A husband who adored her, a healthy son, a home that was truly hers. Everything she had lost when her father died had been returned to her tenfold. The first year of Samuel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful moments. His first smile, his first laugh, his first word, which was "Da," making Carter beam with pride. His first steps, taken on wobbling legs toward his mother's open arms. Each milestone was celebrated, each moment treasured. The homestead continued to thrive. Carter's horses sold well, bringing in good money that allowed them to make improvements. They added a second room to the cabin, giving them more space for their growing family. They bought more cattle and hired a young man named Thomas to help with the heavy work now that Carter had a family to care for as well as a ranch to run. Delilah gradually returned to teaching, bringing Samuel with her to the Hendersons' home. The children adored the baby and were remarkably well behaved during lessons when Samuel was napping in the corner. She continued her sewing work as well, fitting it in during Samuel's naps and quiet moments. When Samuel was 2 years old, Delilah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. And on a warm June day in 1880, she delivered a daughter. They named her Clara Rose, and she was perfect, with auburn hair like her mother and a rosebud mouth that always seemed to be smiling. Carter held his daughter with the same wonder and love he had shown Samuel, and Delilah watched her strong cowboy husband become putty in the hands of a tiny girl. Clara was a cheerful baby, content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes, and Samuel was immediately protective of his little sister. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch grew steadily more prosperous. Carter's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled horseman spread, and he had more work than he could handle. They hired additional help, young men looking to learn the ranching business, and Carter proved to be a patient and thorough teacher. Delilah's teaching expanded as well. Several families in the area asked if she would teach their children, and eventually she had enough students that they converted the barn's loft into a small classroom. 3 days a week, children from neighboring homesteads came to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and history from Mrs. Owens, who was known to be both kind and demanding. The town of Kearney grew around them, attracting more settlers drawn by the railroad and the promise of good farmland. The community became tighter knit, with barn dances and church socials and harvest festivals. Carter and Delilah became respected members of the community, known for their hard work, their happy marriage, and their generous spirits. When people whispered about how they had met, about the auction and the unusual circumstances of their marriage, Carter and Delilah did not hide from it. Instead, they spoke openly about how sometimes good could come from terrible situations, how respect and partnership could build into love, how they had both been given a second chance at life and had seized it with both hands. Young women who found themselves in difficult circumstances sometimes came to Delilah for advice, and she always welcomed them. She helped several find respectable employment or arranged for them to travel to relatives in other towns. Once, she and Carter quietly purchased the debt of a young woman about to be auctioned, just as Delilah had been, and set her free with enough money to start fresh elsewhere. They never spoke of it publicly, but word got around, and their reputation for kindness grew. Years passed in contentment. Samuel grew into a bright, active boy who loved horses just like his father. He would follow Carter around the ranch, mimicking his father's walk and mannerisms, insisting on helping with chores even when he was too small to be much actual help. Clara grew into a sweet-natured girl with her mother's quick mind and her father's determination. She learned to read at 4 and was soon devouring every book in the house. When Samuel was 7 and Clara was 5, Delilah became pregnant a third time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and at 32, she felt every ache and discomfort more acutely. But when she delivered twin boys in the spring of 1885, the difficulty was forgotten in the joy of holding two perfect babies. They named the twins Daniel and David, and Carter joked that they now had enough children for a proper ranch crew. The twins were identical, with Carter's gray eyes and Delilah's stubborn chin, and telling them apart became a family challenge. The house had to be expanded again to accommodate their growing family. Carter and his hired men built on 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen, transforming the simple cabin into a comfortable family home. Delilah hung curtains she had sewn herself, filled the rooms with furniture Carter built, and created a warm, loving environment where their children thrived. Samuel at 7 was old enough to understand bits of his parents' story. One evening, as Delilah tucked him into bed, he asked, "Mama, is it true you were sold like a horse?" Delilah's breath caught. She and Carter had known they would have to explain their history to their children eventually, but she had not expected the question so soon. "Where did you hear that?" "Billy Henderson said his pa told him. He said you were auctioned in town and Papa bought you. Is it true?" Delilah sat on the edge of Samuel's bed and smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead. "Yes, it is true. When I was a young woman, some bad things happened, and some bad men decided to sell me to pay debts that were not mine. Your father saw what was happening and knew it was wrong, so he paid money to set me free. And then you got married. Eventually, yes. At first, your father just wanted to help me, but we became friends and then we fell in love and then we got married. And I am very glad we did because otherwise I would not have you or Clara or the twins." Samuel thought about this seriously. "Papa is a hero." "Yes," Delilah agreed. "He is. But do not tell him I said so. He is already quite proud." Samuel giggled. "I think Papa is the best Papa in the world." "I think so too," Delilah said, kissing his forehead. "Now sleep. Morning comes early on a ranch." As the children grew, Carter and Delilah made sure they understood the value of hard work, respect for others, and the importance of standing up for what was right. They taught by example, showing their children a marriage built on equality and love, demonstrating how partners should treat each other with kindness and consideration. Samuel showed an early talent for working with horses, just like his father. By the time he was 10, he could gentle a green horse better than men twice his age. Carter glowed with pride watching his son work, seeing his own skills passed down to the next generation. Clara developed a passion for learning that matched her mother's. She absorbed everything Delilah taught her and was soon helping teach the younger students in Delilah's school. At 8 years old, She announced she wanted to be a teacher like her mother, and possibly also a writer, because she had stories in her head that needed to be written down. The twins, Daniel and David, were mischievous and inseparable. They got into every kind of trouble imaginable, but they were also fiercely loyal and loving. They kept the household lively with their antics and their laughter. In 1890, when Samuel was 13, a drought hit Nebraska hard. The summer was brutal, with temperatures soaring and rain refusing to fall. Creeks dried up, pastures turned brown, and ranchers across the region struggled to keep their livestock alive. Carter worked from dawn to dusk hauling water from the deep well, rationing hay, making impossible decisions about which animals to sell and which to try to save. The strain showed on his face, new lines appearing around his eyes and mouth. He was 41 now, his dark hair showing threads of gray, his body still strong but bearing the marks of years of hard labor. Delilah did everything she could to help. She rose before dawn to help with chores, stretched their supplies to feed the hired hands, and took an extra sewing to bring in additional cash. The children pitched in without being asked, doing their chores without complaint despite the heat and the worry that permeated the household. One particularly hot evening in August, Carter came inside looking more discouraged than Delilah had seen him in years. He sank into a chair at the table and put his head in his hands. "We are going to lose half the herd," he said, his voice rough. "There is no way around it. The pasture cannot support them, and I cannot afford to buy enough hay to feed them through until the drought breaks." Delilah poured him a glass of water and sat beside him. How much would the hay cost? Carter named a figure that made her wince. It was more than they had saved. "I will have to take a loan," he said. "I swore I would never go into debt after what happened to your father, but I see no other choice." "Wait," Delilah said. "Before you do that, let me think." She stood and went to the small desk where she kept the household accounts. She pulled out her ledger and began calculating quickly, her mind working through numbers and possibilities. Carter watched her, knowing better than to interrupt when she had that look of fierce concentration on her face. Finally, Delilah looked up. "We have money from the horse sales last month. We have the payment from the army for those 3 horses they bought. We have my teaching money for the term. And I have been saving a portion of my sewing money that you do not know about for emergencies." "Delilah, that is your money." "It is our money," she corrected firmly. "We are partners, remember? We have been partners since the day we married. If we combine everything, we can buy the hay without taking a loan. It will empty our savings completely, but we will not go into debt." Carter stared at her. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." "We have weathered storms before, Carter. We will weather this one too." He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "What did I ever do to deserve you?" he murmured into her hair. "You paid double and called me your equal," Delilah replied. "And you have been treating me that way ever since." They bought the hay and nursed their herd through the drought. It was a hard summer, one of the hardest of their marriage, but they survived it. When the rains finally came in September, both Carter and Delilah stood outside in the downpour, faces turned up to the sky, laughing with relief. The children ran out to join them, dancing in the rain, and soon they were all soaked and muddy and happier than they had been in months. Carter caught Delilah around the waist and spun her in a circle, both of them grinning like fools. "We made it," he said. "We always do," she replied. The years continued to roll by, bringing their share of challenges and joys. There were winters so cold the livestock needed constant care to survive, and summers so hot the garden withered despite constant watering. There were years when prices were good and they prospered, and years when prices fell and they struggled. But through it all, Carter and Delilah faced everything together, their partnership as strong as it had been on the day they married, perhaps even stronger for having weathered so many storms. Samuel grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's kindness. At 18, he announced his intention to marry Emily Henderson, the eldest daughter of their neighbors, a sweet girl he had known his entire life. Carter and Delilah gave their blessing, and the wedding was held on the ranch on a beautiful summer day, with half the county in attendance. Watching Samuel marry the woman he loved, seeing the joy on his face as he said his vows, Carter felt his own eyes grow damp. He reached for Delilah's hand and squeezed it, and she squeezed back, both of them remembering their own wedding day 14 years earlier. Clara, at 16, was preparing to attend the new teachers' college in Lincoln. She had won a scholarship based on her excellent marks and her passion for education. Delilah helped her daughter pack, torn between pride and sadness at seeing her little girl leave home. "I will visit often," Clara promised as she hugged her mother goodbye at the train station. "And I will write every week." "You had better," Delilah said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "And remember everything I taught you. Be fierce, be kind, and never let anyone tell you that you cannot do something simply because you are a woman." "I will make you proud, Mama," Clara said. "You already do," Delilah assured her. The twins at 11 were still inseparable and still getting into trouble, though their mischief was now more sophisticated. They had grand plans to become cowboys and see the West, to have adventures and make their fortunes. Carter and Delilah listened to their dreams with amusement and affection, knowing the boys would find their own paths in time. As Carter and Delilah moved into their 40s, their lives took on a different rhythm. The hard physical labor of building the ranch was behind them. They had help now, good men who worked the land and tended the livestock. They could afford to slow down slightly, to enjoy the fruits of all their years of hard work. Carter spent more time training horses, which he loved, and less time on the brutal daily labor. Delilah continued teaching but reduced her class size, taking only students who were genuinely eager to learn. She also began writing down their story, thinking that perhaps one day their grandchildren might want to know how their grandparents met and fell in love. On a cold December evening in 1891, exactly 15 years after the day they met, Carter surprised Delilah with a gift. He presented her with a beautiful locket on a gold chain. Inside were tiny photographs of their 4 children. "This is lovely," Delilah said, tears forming in her eyes. "But what is the occasion?" "The occasion is that 15 years ago today, I saw a woman with auburn hair standing on an auction platform in the snow, and I made the best decision of my life," Carter said. "I wanted to mark the anniversary." Delilah fastened the locket around her neck and then wrapped her arms around her husband. 15 years. So much has changed. "And so much has stayed the same," Carter replied. "I still love you just as much as I did when we married. More even, because now I know you in all your strength and stubbornness and brilliance." "Stubbornness?" Delilah pulled back to look at him with mock indignation. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met," Carter said with a grin. "It is one of the things I love most about you." "Good," Delilah said, "because I am not changing." "I would not want you to," Carter assured her. He kissed her softly. "Thank you for taking a chance on me all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for saving me," Delilah replied. "Thank you for seeing me as an equal when the world wanted to treat me as property. Thank you for being the man I needed, and the man I wanted, even when I did not know I wanted you." That night, they sat by the fire long after the children had gone to bed, talking about their years together, remembering hardships overcome and joys celebrated. They talked about their children and their dreams for the future. They made plans for the ranch, for the school, for the years ahead. "Do you ever regret it?" Carter asked quietly. "The way we started? I know you did not choose me freely, not really. Circumstances forced your hand." Delilah thought about the question seriously before answering. "I regret what happened to my father. I regret the cruelty of those men who auctioned me. But I do not regret you, Carter, not for a single moment. Yes, circumstances brought us together, but I chose to marry you. I chose to build this life with you, and I would choose you again every single time." "I would choose you too," Carter said, "every single time." The years rolled on, bringing new grandchildren as Samuel and Emily started their own family, bringing letters from Clara full of her adventures at college and her plans to open a school for girls in Lincoln, bringing the twins through their wild adolescence into young adulthood. Carter and Delilah grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening on their faces, but their love remained as strong as ever. They had built something real and lasting, a marriage that had started in the most unlikely circumstances and had grown into a true partnership. In 1896, on their 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The ranch was filled with friends and neighbors, with music and dancing and laughter. Samuel gave a toast that made both his parents cry, thanking them for showing him what a real marriage looked like, what real partnership meant. Clara read a poem she had written about her parents, about a cowboy who saw injustice and could not walk away, about a woman who found strength in the darkest moment, about two people who chose each other and built a life of love and equality. The twins performed a comedy sketch about their parents that had everyone roaring with laughter, gently mocking their father's tendency to fuss over the horses and their mother's inability to walk past a book without stopping to read. At the end of the evening, when the guests had finally departed and the children had cleaned up and gone to their own homes or to bed, Carter and Delilah stood on their porch looking out at the land they had built together. 20 years, Delilah said softly. "It feels like forever and also like no time at all." "I know exactly what you mean," Carter replied. He pulled her close and they stood together in comfortable silence. "You remember when Marshall Hendricks asked me if I was staying with you of my own free will?" Delilah asked. "I do. I have thought about that moment many times over the years. At the time, I was staying because I had nowhere else to go. But if he asked me that question now, my answer would be so different. I stay because I choose to, because I cannot imagine my life without you. Because you are my home, Carter Owens. And you are mine," Carter said, his voice thick with emotion. "You always have been, from the moment I saw you standing in that snow. I knew somehow that you were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours." They stood together as the stars came out overhead, as the sounds of the ranch settled into evening quiet. They had built this together, this life, this family, this love. They had faced every challenge side by side, equal partners in all things. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Across the ranch, the horses and cattle they had raised grazed in peace. In the distance, the lights of Kearney glowed, a town they had helped build and strengthen. Everything they saw was a testament to their partnership, to the love they had built from such an unlikely beginning. "Come inside," Carter finally said. "It is getting cold." "In a moment," Delilah replied. "I just want to stand here with you a little longer." So they did, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at the life they had built together. A cowboy who paid double and a woman he called his equal. Two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chose to build something beautiful. And as the years continued to pass, they would face them together as they always had. Partners, equals, lovers, friends. Everything a marriage should be, built on a foundation of respect and grown into deep, abiding love. The story could have ended so differently. If Carter had ridden away from Kearney that December day, if he had let his discomfort with the auction keep him from acting, if he had been a different kind of man who saw Delilah as property rather than a person deserving of respect and freedom. But he did not ride away. He stayed and he acted, and he treated Delilah as an equal from the very first moment. And in doing so, he changed both their lives forever. As they finally turned and walked back into their warm home together, hand in hand the way they had walked through their entire life together, Delilah thought about that terrified girl standing on the auction platform in the snow. She wished she could go back and tell that girl not to despair, that help was coming, that the tall cowboy in the back of the crowd would change everything. She would tell that girl that love could grow in the most unexpected places. That partnership and respect could be the foundation of something beautiful. That sometimes the darkest moments preceded the brightest dawn, but of course, she could not go back. She could only go forward, hand in hand with the man who had saved her, the man she had chosen, the man who chose her every single day. Carter and Delilah Owens lived long, happy lives. They watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They saw their ranch prosper and become one of the most successful in the county. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. When Carter passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Delilah held his hand and whispered her love to him one final time. She told him thank you for everything, for saving her and loving her and building a life with her. She told him she would see him again, when her own time came. And when Delilah followed him 2 years later, passing quietly in the same bed where she had given birth to their children and spent thousands of nights wrapped in her husband's arms, she went with a smile on her face. Because she knew she had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and purpose and meaning. Her last thoughts were of a snowy December day in 1876, of a cowboy's gray eyes looking at her with unexpected respect, of strong hands draping a warm coat around her shoulders, of a voice saying, "May I?" and meaning it. She thought of all the years that followed, all the moments big and small that had woven together into the tapestry of their life. The laughter and the tears, the struggles and the triumphs, the ordinary days and the extraordinary ones. All of it precious, all of it meaningful, all of it built on the foundation of two people who chose to see each other as equals and to build something beautiful together. The ranch passed to Samuel, who ran it with the same care and integrity his father had taught him. Clara opened her school for girls, which became famous throughout Nebraska for its rigorous academics and its insistence that women could achieve anything men could. The twins eventually started their own ranch together, partners in all things just like their parents had been. And all of them, children and grandchildren alike, carried with them the story of how their family began. The story of a woman auctioned as snow fell hard, and the cowboy who paid double and called her his equal. The story of how love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings, how respect and partnership could build into something enduring and beautiful. It was a story they told their own children and grandchildren, a story that became part of the family's legacy. A reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for what is right, even when it costs you. A reminder that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. A reminder that the best relationships are built on equality and partnership. And most of all, a reminder that love comes in many forms, that it can grow from the smallest seeds, and that when nurtured with care and respect and genuine partnership, it can bloom into something that lasts not just a lifetime, but generations. The snow has long since melted from that December day in 1876, but the love that began then echoes forward through time, living on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Carter and Delilah Owens. Living on in the ranch they built together, in the school Delilah founded, in the values they taught and the example they set. Two people who met in the worst of circumstances and built the best of lives. A cowboy and the woman he saved. Partners, equals, lovers. Forever bound together by a love that conquered everything. A love that started with a simple act of human decency and grew into something magnificent. And if you visit Kearney, Nebraska today, you can still find their homestead, carefully preserved by their descendants. You can see the cabin where they lived, expanded over the years, but still containing the original room where they shared their first awkward meals and their first tentative conversations. You can see the barn where Delilah taught her students, the corral where Carter trained his horses, the porch where they stood together on countless evenings looking out at the land they loved. And if you are very lucky, one of their descendants might tell you the story. The whole story, from beginning to end. The story of how she was auctioned as snow fell hard, how the cowboy paid double and called her his equal, and how that single act of courage and compassion changed everything. It is a love story for the ages. A reminder that love conquers all, but only when it is built on the right foundation. A foundation of respect, equality, partnership, and genuine care for another person's well-being and happiness. Carter and Delilah Owens found that foundation in the most unlikely place, and they built a love story that would be told for generations to come. A love story that began in snow and auction blocks and fear, but ended in warmth and prosperity and joy. A love story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places if we are brave enough to reach for them. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Carter and Delilah Owens are together still, hand in hand, equal partners for all eternity. Still choosing each other, still building something beautiful, still proving that love, real love built on respect and equality, truly does conquer all.